Just going to check the microphone. Okay. Welcome everybody to this afternoon session looking at the accelerating of industrial decarbonisation and in particular the critical role of financial assistance. I thought you were getting up to leave, you realised you were in the wrong room, but that's reassuring. You're getting closer, really interested in the topic. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ed Webber. I'm a Deputy Director in the UK's Business Department, and I am lucky enough to oversee a combination of campaigns that came out of COP26 and a number of pots of international climate finance, some of which we'll be talking about in connection to today. But as a result of that, it means I'm incredibly passionate about the subject, about the importance of decarbonising the industrial sector. And we know that this is one of the next big frontiers on our pathway to try to achieve our Paris goals. And at the current rate, we know that given the pace of growing emissions from the industry sector, that it could end up being the largest source of emissions within a decade globally. So this really is a priority to try to get right now and try to avoid that coming through. So today's event, as well as talking about industrial decarbonisation in the round, we also want to touch in particular on a couple of big announcements that have been made today. One is around the CIFs Industry Transitions Programme, which hopefully we'll hear a lot more about. And the other is the EBRD's CIF Hydrogen Programme in Egypt, which I know has been a very exciting new topic and keen to hear a lot more about that. The event is in three parts. We'll hear some opening remarks from our panellists. I have a round of questions, and then we'll open up to the floor, so do get your thinking caps on questions you might want to ask. I have a few backups as well if we need a few prompts. A reminder to panelists just to be conscious to have the microphone tilted towards your mouth, because it's quite directional, and so that everyone can hear clearly. And I'm going to now just turn to the first panellist, who's also my boss, therefore it's very important I get this right, Kate Hughes, who's Director for International Net Zero Climate Finance and Strategy in the UK's Business Department. Kate, do you want to say a few introductory remarks about this topic? Over to you.
Okay, I'm going to turn it on, and that's going to help. Thank you very much, Ed, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And it is a really exciting topic for us today on Decarbonisation Day. And Ed set it out, the scale of the challenge and why we are particularly interested in looking at the industrial sector as part of what we need to consider if we are going to get to 1.5 degrees. It's absolutely critical that we look at this sector. It's growing, it's large, and it's responsible for such an important part of the emissions, and we need to get it right. And that's because also this is a global challenge. Industry is a growing area, and if we get it right, we get that magic combination of getting economic growth, creating jobs, while also reducing emissions as well. And as Ed said, we focused on industry at COP26 and through the breakthrough agenda, because it is highlighting in the first breakthrough report, which came out in September, that 85% of new production capacity in heavy industry sectors are expected to be deployed in developing economies and emerging markets. And we know that financial assistance is going to be absolutely critical if we're going to tackle that growth in those countries and to work with them, and that finance is going to be a huge part of that transition and helping those countries. So if we get it right, we can do just that. We can actually create jobs and have that growth while tackling the emissions from industry. And through what's been actually, a huge year for us as COP presidency and now passing over to Egypt, I think what we're doing is really keen to demonstrate our commitment to get countries together to continue to collaborate on industrial decarbonisation and these big global challenges that are so complex as well. And what that means is that we've all got to be climate leaders. We've all got to be part of the solution here as well if we're going to actually achieve those goals. And from the UK perspective, through our international climate finance, we are really, really pleased to announce today that along with Sweden, we've launched the world's first large-scale industry programme with our friends from the CIFs. It's the CIF Industrial Transitions Programme. So the UK and Sweden have launched it, and we are the first donors into that, and we would welcome any other donors to join us as well. As we just said in the last session here, this is very much a multilateral effort, and we all need to be working together to make these transitions. And the UK is also working, as we just heard in the last session, for those of you who were there as well, that the NAMA facility, which we've now renamed the Mitigation Action Facility, those in the audience are laughing at me because I said it very many times, is also pivoting to make sure that we are focusing on those really hard to abate sectors, the ones where sort of finance hasn't traditionally flowed into to provide that support as well. So the new Mitigation Action Facility is also going to be working in the industrial sector as well as in power, energy and transport. And the facility provides high-value grant funding, up to £20 million, that can be used by project implementers to pilot particularly innovative programs before they can scale those up and deploy them more widely as well. And finally, as part of this kind of new, renewed effort from the UK in focusing on these sectors in line with the breakthrough agenda, our Prime Minister announced on Monday that we'll be putting £65.5 million into the Clean Energy Innovation Facility, which is aimed at supporting developing countries to accelerate the commercialisation of clean energy technologies in a range of themes, including hydrogen and critical minerals, so that we can really support that transitions as well towards net zero. So that's what the UK is doing, and now I'm really interested to hear from the rest of the panel as well how we're going to collectively work towards those goals. Thanks, Ed.
Great job, Kate. Well done. I hope the briefing was all right. Moving on swiftly to Mafalda, if I can turn to you. You're the CEO of the Climate Investment Funds. We have a long-standing and very excellent partnership. Really keen to hear what your reflections are on this announcement today, and also where you see it going over the coming years. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the UK for being a champion of our work since 2008, since the CIFs were established, and you know, throughout the entire period. And again, with the support of UK, we launched this morning this industrial decarbonisation program that Kate was just talking about. And I congratulate the UK for putting this in the agenda through the breakthrough agenda last COP, because as Kate said as well, we need to tackle the emissions coming from this sector. Unless if we do so, we will certainly not meet the Paris goals, our climate goals. And as Ed said as well, industrial emissions, the emissions from the industrial sector could become, in the years to come, the largest source of emissions. And the reason why we need to focus in developing countries, as Kate also alluded to, is because most of the emissions are actually in developing countries, and they are set to rise. Given population growth and the gap in terms of of infrastructure investments in the developing countries, it is expected that most of the demand and the emissions will come from those markets. So it's really important to help support the countries. The microphone is a little bit, it comes on and off, in and on. It's really important to support these countries, you know, embrace technologies that already exist, adopt technologies that already exist, but also be part of this new wave of frontier technologies that represent economic opportunities. We know, for example, and we'll hear more from our colleague here from EBRD, green hydrogen, which is an area that we intend to invest in quite substantially through this program as well. There's great potential in developing countries. You'll hear about this first transaction in Egypt, but just in South Africa, the Just Energy Transition Partnership that was unveiled also this week. One of the key pillars is not just the power sector, but it's actually a green hydrogen pillar. So really a strong interest, because some of these countries are really well positioned and have a comparative advantage in these new technologies and markets. So that's what we intend to do, is to support our partners, the multilateral development banks, in doing more in this area, which is an area that most of them actually haven't been doing much on, and we hope that through our platform and incentives, they will embrace this agenda a lot more forcefully. So I'll leave more comments for later and explain a little bit more about the program. Maybe just to say that, as is the case normally with the climate investment funds, we have a very flexible investment platform. So we seek to work with governments in terms of their policy and regulatory frameworks to enable this transition and these investments. But we also have the flexibility to work with the sectors on sector roadmaps to drive transitions. But we are also aiming at supporting work at the corporate level and at the facility level. So, and again, we are working at technologies that already exist and can be deployed, and also then the new frontier technologies.
Great, thanks, Mafalda. Can I now invite Jan Willem van der Ven, correct? Yes, who is the Head of International Policy and Engagement for Climate Strategy and Regional Delivery at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Great to get your reflections on the announcements made today and your wider view on how you see this area of industrial decarbonisation projecting into the future. Over to you.
So, thank you very much, and my congratulations to the UK and to the CIFs as to this wonderful news. My father knows I'm a big proponent of working with the industry. It's a hard-to-abate sector, and I think I even wrote on the proposal a little bit in past. Now, good things take time, and I'm very happy that all of these things now have come together, and we can launch this very, very important industrial window. Let's say, to remind, 30% of the of all emissions come from the industry, and it's hard to abate, so the marginal costs are quite high for the abatement, which means there will be the longest emitting when we go down to net zero, and now is the starting point. We can't wait any longer in order to really start tackling. Now the opportunities are opening. As you may know, we financed here in Egypt the Benban photovoltaic project a while ago that helped to suppress the cost of renewables. In our view, renewables probably don't need so much public support anymore, and the costs come down. Okay, there's a bit of a current economic cycle thing going on that aberrates the cost a bit, but over time the cost will further come down. Now, so the next phase is to bring down the cost of the other technology that is necessary to produce green hydrogen, which is the electrolyzers, and that needs that's a scalable market, that needs scale, but you always need to have a start point, a demonstration. So together with the CIF and with the high impact partnership to which that's a fund at the EBRD, to which the UK is also contributing, we were able to put together let's say the financing for the very first electrolyzer green hydrogen plant here in Egypt that will be fully functioning on green power, because they're also going to invest in new solar, new solar and wind. So that's all very good news, and why then Egypt, you may think? Well, look outside, the sun is shining, and the marginal cost of producing hydrogen in countries like Egypt is very, very low. Now, hydrogen is just an input to many, many other industrial processes, fertilizers and the connection to food being one of them, but also for shipping. We'll be thinking about green ammonia and so on. So there are many good purposes as to this hydrogen, provided it is generated by renewable energy. Now, The very first project has a high grant intensity, but it's necessary to show that it works as to technology. But we embed this, of course, in a the EBRD does more than just financing of projects. We also provide a lot of policy support, and things we are working on is, for example, a low carbon hydrogen strategy. We're also working on with the fertilizer sector on the low carbon pathway for the fertilizer sector. So all these things are being embedded in a policy environment and a regulatory environment that eventually should drive the uptake of these type of technologies. Now I can talk for ages now, but I will not do that. But thank you again. It's really appreciated. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jan Willem. And yeah, congratulations again on the fantastic project with Egypt. We are all really behind that and look forward to seeing more of the same in the future. Maybe just now to turn to our final panelist, Ian Macaulay. You are the Director and Head of Project Finance for Africa and Pakistan at the British International Investment. Can you give some of your own reflections on your experiences in those regions and the role of financial assistance in industrial decarbonisations? Over to you.
So the detailed questions on our projects we'll do in the next question, I presume, but maybe just some broad reflections. So the business opportunity of probably this generation is transition. It brings massive opportunities that weren't seen 5 years ago. And things like green hydrogen bring incredible options for export to try and cover the initial costs of that, and then hopefully in the medium to longer term for domestic and regional uses as well. And as a DFI, the consideration of the role of the money that we bring to bear to help bring the cost point of some of these down so that they're viable at an earlier stage to help the decarbonisation is quite an important role that we can do. So, for instance, the project here in Egypt and the future that starts to come from that into green steel, into electric mobility, and into the source of power from a peaking perspective, and also the massive capability that it brings from a storage prospect, from long duration storage, maybe weeks and months storage, is something that wasn't foreseen a whole bunch of years ago. The other topic that I'll talk on, maybe just very briefly, is that on the transition pathway on decarbonisation, and that it's often a complex discussion because of certain countries and certain industries being in a much more rapid growth stage and able to fit the bill, if it were, of changing their methods of production. And we've worked recently to produce a transition finance African guide, which we did with 91 Oxford and the Blended Finance Task Force, to try and talk through from a financial institutions perspective how they would think about bringing to bear the finance to help this transition on their investments in potentially emissive sectors. And maybe I'll stop there because I'd rather save the fire for the next question.
Thanks, Ian. Kate, turning back to you, if I may, can you say a little bit more about the nature of the challenge in the industry space, and in particular why it's so important to combine both concessional finance and technical assistance to help transform the industrial sector?
You can tell I'm not a technology person. I think you're all here because you know kind of the power that we get from bringing together different kinds of finance, and how important it is to have layers of concessional finance which we can bring to projects in developing countries, and the importance of providing targeted and tailored finance to different sectors, different countries, that actually is specific to the needs of not just the individual countries, but also then the individual sectors and actually the individual projects that we're looking at. So I'm saying that, and it's you will all absolutely know that. And I think the power here as well is not just kind of the concessional finance and the power that can bring in terms of being able to de-risk and therefore bring private finance with it as well, but it's this element of technical assistance too, which is absolutely critically important. And we know it from sectors like renewable energy that Jan Willem talked about too, where we know that those are needed to overcome the regulatory burdens and to kind of plan really carefully as well. And as we come into this new sector and create these new funds, we know that actually what we're trying to do is something which hasn't really been done before as well in terms of this large-scale financing, and therefore it's really important to have the technical assistance alongside it as well in these nascent and transitional markets, so that actually we can look at how do we set the right regulatory frameworks, how can we do that planning, how can we target this to what's a really complex and varied approach, because although we're talking about industry, that covers a huge range of different kinds of deployment and applications, as well as different countries as well. So the technical assistance is absolutely critical to guide some of those decisions and to also make the right plans and kind of get the right foundations in place. So I just wanted to point to, and sorry Mafalda, and if I'm stealing your thunder, in case you talk about this, but so the CIFs supported a $500 million financing facility in Rajasthan to develop their renewable energy transition investment program. And the small bit of sort of $2 million of technical assistance there helped the infrastructure planning, the regulators' institutional knowledge to manage those changes, and an established renewable energy strategy and roadmap in Rajasthan then contributed to the rapid scale-up and achievement of the results in the network transmission capacity. It was expanded up to 3,700 megawatts in line with expected outputs and nearly doubling its capacity. But without that technical assistance there at the beginning, that larger scale transformation wouldn't have been able to happen. And the technical assistance, I think it's just worth saying too, because it's a really important part of what we were talking about at COP26 and here as well in terms of implementation, is that it supports that just transition piece as well. Without the technical assistance in there, there isn't the kind of the support, the financing, to actually make sure that we are thinking about the impact on people of these projects as well. And another great example is the Sia wind farm project in South Africa, where stakeholder engagement with that local community identified local employment opportunities as well. And ESCOM then included a requirement that contractors commit to skills development for labourers. Contractors employed labourers from the local community, and that helps create those opportunities in a community that was otherwise going to really struggle and had nothing. So that technical assistance again made sure that actually we were putting people and those local considerations at the heart of what is happening as well. So we're really excited that this new fund is combining the technical assistance right alongside, hand in hand, with the concessional finance that will actually then make these projects happen at scale and at speed. Thanks, Ed.
Great, thanks, Kate. Mafalda, can you say a bit more about why this new program is a first of its kind? What makes it so unique in that respect? And what do you hope to see coming from it in terms of being able to scale that in the future? Over to you.
Thank you. Ed, I think my microphone is keep everybody on its toes. No, it's okay. Okay. Now, I just want to, before I get there to your question, Ed, just to reflect a little bit on what Kate was saying. I mean, we have seen the power of this model of actually having a flexible investment platform. This is what the climate investment funds are about. It's about meeting the demand, be it in terms of technical assistance to support governments with the regulations or the policies, be it working with the financial intermediaries and provide them with the advisory services so that they can stand up lines of credit for the real economy, and this for renewable energy, but also energy efficiency, resilience. We have all of those experiences in our portfolio. But it's basically meeting where the demand is. Sometimes we require that technical assistance, sometimes we don't. Sometimes, we require certain financial instruments, use of certain financial instruments. In other cases, it requires others. But we have seen the power of the concessional capital in opening up and creating markets. We have ample examples that we can talk about in all of the regions of the world opening up markets, renewable energy markets where they didn't exist, bringing down the subsidy that is actually required for the governments to put in frontier technologies, because, you know, they were the first, second, or third of its kind investments in those markets. So, and the fact that, you know, we work with the multilateral development banks that know these markets well, both from the, you know, the sovereign and non-sovereign side, can engage at the policy level, can engage at the investment level, and bringing them actually together as well, because they have a collective strength that is more than the sum of the parts. So we've actually, and this is exactly what we want to bring to this industrial decarbonization program, and that we see as, you know, a key comparative advantage of our investment platform. Why industrial decarbonization? When we were looking at, you know, how should we perform our role, which is to push the frontier to address gaps in the international climate finance architecture, when we were having those discussions 2 years ago with all of our partners, including, you know, the multilateral development banks, but our shareholders and others, we've clearly identified one area that came out very critically was coal transition, that we are doing quite a lot on as well, announced at the last COP, and, you know, being championed as well by UK and Canada and US and Germany and others. So coal transition clearly came to be understood that it's not enough to invest in renewable energy, because if we don't phase out from coal, we will not meet the Paris Agreement goals. So we actually have to, in parallel, as we build up the renewable energy capacity, we actually have to phase out from coal. So there was a clear gap in that architecture, and, you know, we put forward an investment program, and it's already showing progress. We've seen the announcement of the South Africa Just Energy Transition investment plan, and we will hear next week about the progress in Indonesia. Well, the industrial sector is another one where there's a big gap. And as, you know, we've heard here today, wasn't really receiving enough attention. So it was actually great that UK, through the breakthrough agenda last year at COP, placed emphasis and brought attention to this sector, and we are seeing other initiatives like the First Movers Coalition and others that are really bringing attention to this sector and to the necessity of paying attention to this sector. Because as Jan Willem was also saying, and Kate had said, it can quickly become the largest emitting sector. And we really need to place efforts there as well. So this was a gap, and we hope that by using the power of our investment model, which has proven itself in the past to deliver impact, and really be a catalyst of private sector capital investments. We hope that you know, we can add value, and by doing so, supporting efforts in developing countries, because they need to be happening at the same time as the efforts that we are seeing in developed countries. We are seeing with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, you know, there will be plenty of support for investments in industrial decarbonization. We will see the same in Europe. Well, we need to undertake similar efforts to drive these investments in developing countries as well.
Well said. Thanks, Mafalda. Jan Willem, turning back to you, can you say a bit more about the wider role of MDBs in facilitating the transition to industrial sectors?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, again, the CIFs and the CTF is a wonderful vehicle. I'm nearly sure that I'm correct what I'm saying now, which is in the climate finance reporting, you see that the biggest numbers are coming from the MDBs. And I really think it's thanks to the CIFs that brings the MDBs together and ensures coordination and cohesion, is kind of an invariable aspect of the CIF, and it's not being told enough. So I think this is one of the reasons why the MDBs are very successful in climate finance. Now we are stepping up, and the next thing now is the so-called Paris alignment. Yeah. So Paris alignment for us means that, and for EBRD, that as of next year, none of our investments will pass the board if they're not Paris aligned. And now Paris alignment means that you need to have access to quite a bit of data and our outlook as to where the countries are going, and in particular also on the industrial sector. So programs like the industrial window can help to as I said before, create that policy environment, the strategies that are necessary for us to inform whether an investment is indeed Paris aligned or not. So that's an invaluable asset, so to say, in this respect. So coordination is important. It's fostered by, but if you also on the technical assistance, as you mentioned, so we are rolling out a program what we call corporate climate governance, and basically that's doing the policy dialogue, not on the national level, but really on the corporate level, because also there we need to change tack as to how boards of industrial companies from developing countries are looking at their investments and how they assess. And here we provide support in lining out their corporate strategies as to how they can reach net zero. And what's important is not net zero by 2050. Now what we want to hear is what are you going to do next year and what kind of investments are rolling out. We're doing the same, by the way, on the municipal level through our Green City Action Plans. And for example, we have an example in Georgia where we work with Tbilisi as a municipality. So we identified one project as a part of that low carbon pathway on the kind of municipal level. But we identified 7 projects, we could only do 1. So there are 6 projects being financed by other parties as a result of that policy work. So that's, I think, very, very important, and funds like Mafalda and the HIPCA are allowing for this type of action. By the way, on big announcements, we will hear a bit more later, or maybe as a matter of fact now. So we are, as you may know, also working on a big energy transition platform here in, let's say here in Egypt, and it's very big. And also here, I don't want to steal the UK's thunder, so I won't say anything further.
Great, thanks, Jan Willem. Before we open up for questions from the floor, Ian, now I really would like to know your sort of direct experiences from BII in how on the ground these industrial transitions have actually been manifesting themselves. So over to you to get your reflections.
Thank you very much. So I'll try and touch on 3 areas. I'm not sure I'll get to the 4th, but the 3 areas is green hydrogen, industrial energy efficiency, green manufacturing. I'll see how I go if I can get into carbon capture, but let me start with those. So green hydrogen, first of all, we're looking in Northern Africa and Southern Africa right now, so we're just about to take a well-spoken about project through our investment process shortly for the decarbonisation of the fertilizer industry. And we see that the green hydrogen potential in Egypt here as well for decarbonising logistics is a very, very important one too, for low carbon bunker fuel, and a real opportunity for the Suez Canal area, which hasn't done bunkering for many, many decades. It seems to be the perfect opportunity, and possibly as a test case for other parts of the shipping industry as well. Our investee company, Globalec, was awarded 3 gigawatts of green hydrogen and green ammonia here in Egypt as well, with the Suez Canal Economic Zone. Our investee company, Ayana, in Egypt, has recently signed an MOU with Norwegian green hydrogen developer Greenstat Hydrogen India for development of green hydrogen in India. In Southern Africa, we've seen the development of green hydrogen for replacement of gas for peaking power applications for dispatchable power, and we see this has been really useful, and I was saying earlier, for long-term storage for weeks and months, which we think is particularly interesting. Industrial energy efficiency, perhaps two areas to touch on here. The one is we recently made a third follow-on investment in Indorama Elim, Nigeria's largest fertilizing company, and this particular investment wasn't for an extra line, it was for an upgrade of the reduction process to reduce CO2 emissions of about 70,000 tons per year. But more importantly, this helps to support the food security and reduce the agricultural import demand in Nigeria. The second part of the industrial efficiency is energy as a service. We see this as a potentially developing market which seems to have got off the ground a little slower than what we thought, and this is companies bringing to bear capex so that operators of buildings and operators of various services are seeing this as paying for a service, not having to put in the capital to reduce the energy usage of various facilities, but particularly for buildings. And two investments have been made by our resources efficiency team there, Rozov, which has helped India companies reduce water consumption, and Tata Cleantech Capital, which is specialized finance at offices SME, is looking to upgrade energy efficiency. So touching on green manufacturing, we partnered recently with Lafarge Holcim on the 14 Trees project that is an affordable housing technology in Africa, and it's a replacement of building materials that's got low emissions and avoids the deforestation associated with the wood-fired, oh, this sounds a bit boomy, is that better? Coal blocks. Also things like plastic recycling and green building materials we see as being critical for this element of the sector. But an important element, and this is something particularly highlighted, there was a reference to the JETP in South Africa, and maybe the first one to come to market, but certainly in the JETP programs as well, is the localization of manufacturing of these transition technologies in each of these countries is really, really critical, and particularly solar panels, electrolyzers, battery components is going to be a really important part of how that money is spent and how the economic transition is made. So on carbon capture, our Smart Industries group is looking at still a very emerging sector in terms of carbon capture, but equipment and service providers who are looking to be scaling up. There is a few target investments where there's some innovation, and some of the innovation is starting to develop as a result of some legislation change, and that legislation at the moment in the US, but hopefully that same thinking starts to come about in other countries, that it can accelerate some of that investment. And we're starting to see some of our investee companies look at carbon capture retrofits, which we think is an interesting prospect for the future.
Great, thanks, Ian. Right, we've got time for about 2 or 3 questions, so I'm just going to throw the floor open, and my helpful assistant here, Gabby, has got a microphone. So yes, sir, over to you. Can you say your name and where you're from as well? That'd be great.
Thank you very much. My name is Nnemeka Iwalokwa. I'm the Managing Director of the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading PLC. It's a government-owned company that is under the Ministry of Finance, and basically it's a company that purchases electricity for the national grid. Now, we just put together an industrial decarbonization strategy, and basically in Nigeria, you have an energy demand of about 20 gig, but the supply that flows through the national grid is about 5 gig. And so industries use about 8 to 12 gig of primarily diesel. And so we're looking at how to displace diesel from the production process, but by switching, getting those industries to come onto the grid. Because the grid, as it is 35% hydro and 65% gas. Now, ordinarily, would also want, in the process of bringing them onto the grid, to also expedite the renewables injection into the grid. Because the system as it is cannot, some of the studies that have been conducted so far say that because of intermittency of renewables, that we cannot really have more than, say, 300 to 500 megawatts of solar on the grid as it is with its problems. Now, my question is, how can the UK support this process of industrial decarbonization in Nigeria? The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has about 3,000 members scattered all over the country, and whilst this conversation may not have carried much traction a few years ago, because a lot of those industries felt that by having their diesel generators that they had sort of insulated themselves from the problems of the system. But then diesel is getting more expensive, and even if you can afford it, sometimes you can't even find it. I mean, in Nigeria at the moment, we have fuel scarcity. And so it's really getting to the point where it's either you figure out how to connect to the grid and receive cleaner electricity, or you simply go out of business. Thank you.
Okay, that was directed at the UK government. Are you okay to take that one? I mean, we can obviously open up to other members of the panel.
Well, I'll start, but I mean, others here may well want to come in, and I think the question is a really difficult one and a challenging one, because obviously, there are some really deep structural issues there that countries need to address. And as you say, it isn't just about one element of the system, it's about a whole system approach, because it's not just about looking at a particular industrial plant, you're talking about actually your whole kind of the grid system if you want to connect to it. And I think what I've heard a lot today, across the discussions on Decarbonisation Day as well, is about also the linked challenges between obviously climate change and where we are in terms of energy security as well. And what you're saying there too about the diesel supplies, if you can't get hold of the energy, we need to make sure that we are deploying and finding energy solutions which are reliable and accessible and affordable, and all of the things that we talk about in sort of the breakthrough agenda and through the sustainable development goals. Because if your energy isn't accessible and affordable and there when you need it, then your industries aren't going to survive, and you're not going to be able to create the jobs as well and continue that economic growth. I'm telling you what you already know in terms of that, but that's why we are supporting programs like the CIFs and the work that we do with EBRD, because the scale that the MDBs can bring means that they can look at this systems-wide approach and help that transition through both the technical assistance piece to actually understand, well, okay, what does that challenge look like on a small basis in terms of coming off a diesel generator, but also how do we look much bigger to make sure that the bigger government-wide support in terms of changing and supporting the grid is there, so that actually this transition can happen at the speed and scale that it needs to happen as well. And I think, again, this is why the push for low carbon energy means that if we get it right, it will be secure, it will be there for you, and you don't have to worry about going out and buying each time, because if we get it right, it will drive down the costs as well long term too, because it will be a wholesale solution for you. But I think we should turn to my colleagues on either side here as well, who will understand much better how do we actually then target the finance to overcome those challenges.
Jan Berlin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, it sounds to me as okay, it's a problem, but it's also an interesting challenge. Let's say as EBRD we work in another country, we're not working in Nigeria as of yet. But we're working, for example, in Uzbekistan, and in Uzbekistan there's let's say also a decarbonization challenge. And what we do there is we have worked with the government to do a very detailed study on the power sector and trying to find out what's the best way indeed to decarbonize, which in that case meant that we need to do two things at the same time, which was to invest, and it is controversial, but if well, let's say well constructed, we're promoting both a massive uptake of wind and solar in Uzbekistan, investing in that, investing in the grid, and also investing in gas-fired power to kind of be sure that you can balance the grid, because a lot of ministers are very worried that there are blackouts and etc. on the grid. So that's a bit, but I think for the you have a bit different situation, if I understand correctly, where the business is self-generating, but I don't know if there's a subsidy on the diesel, but if there would be, then that's one thing to tackle. But let's say solar energy, PV on warehouses and so on, should already be least cost. It should be cheaper than running the diesel. So in that case, you can go first for, let's say, solar diesel combinations, and then over time, when you build out the grid, you can, of course, connect all these warehouses filled with, let's say, solar cells, and maybe there's wind in some places along the coast, etc. So you can increase the nice thing about the diesel is you can convert it to as a backup unit for the variable, let's say, energy on site. Yeah. So there is an opportunity, in fact, there. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in and just see if we've got time for one very brief question and hopefully a very brief answer, but feel free to continue discussing after the event. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much for taking this opportunity first, and thank you for a very informative but also actionable session, making the request rather than a question trying to be more easy than the previous one. This is a private sector request. I work for an industrial parks developer. We have 3 in Egypt, and we're planning to expand aggressively in Africa. And I'd like just to know more about the technical assistance and funding opportunities from the panelists. Maybe I talk to them afterwards. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to exchange further.
Any other final reflections? I think there's probably an ocean of conversation to be had on any of these topics, but I think we have probably run to time, so I'm going to just very briefly wrap up. Look, thank you so much for staying the course of this. I think industrial transition often gets a bit of a sort of technical rep, isn't as quite as sexy as deploying, you know, huge quantities of solar power and wind farms all over the place. But actually it is incredibly interesting and a huge, huge challenge that we're going to have to get extremely good at very, very quickly. Why? Well, as we heard, the emissions are really difficult to deal with, and they are rapidly growing. There's a high risk of carbon lock-in. You know, we're talking about a very, very large pipeline of new industrial assets that are being built every single year in emerging markets, developing countries in particular. And there is therefore, I think, also a risk of a bit of a bifurcation internationally, with developed world moving ahead with new technologies and not being able to share those with emerging markets. But at the same time, we've heard about the opportunities of bringing growth and emissions reductions together. We've heard about the importance of combining de-risking of finance with technical assistance, and that's the best opportunity to ensure projects are successful, that they can scale, that they can be just. We've heard about a lot of emphasis, I think, about the value of the CIFs platform, its flexibility and its ability to help coordinate and bring the other MDBs together, and also about the wider MDB kind of portfolio shifts to align with Paris, and that process continues and needs to hopefully accelerate even further. The importance of engaging with businesses at the board level, and then a whole raft of quite specific examples of successful projects on the ground, and hopefully areas where we can continue to grow into the future. So with that, thanks so much for listening. Thank you to the panel for their excellent informative insights, and if you join me in giving them one last round of applause, thank you very much.